If you're feeling like you're stuck and you're only able to play really simple grooves with basic straight right-hand timekeeping, and you want to be able to play more interesting parts that move around the kit and that use the full kit, in other words, Tom Grooves, then you are in the right place today. I'm teaching you my 3-step process that gets you creating and even improvising Tom Grooves and potentially even fills around the kit so that you can find your inner creativity and fulfillment by discovering, hey, I can play something cool. That's a great feeling and I want that for you. You can do this. Let's dive in. Hey, welcome to The Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so excited that you're hanging out with me today. I help beginner and intermediate drummers become the musicians that actually sound great and that others want to play with. And we do this by teaching you the core, most important drumming skills that get you more results in less time. In other words, this is a channel for busy drummers. If you're busy, this is the place to be. I'm glad you're here today. Today is really going to be fun because after today's lesson, you will be able to put your kick drum on autopilot. You're going to get your hands playing independently of your right foot. So we're going to be building coordination. You're going to know exactly how to add in strategic accents and add in the toms to really make this stuff interesting. And then we're going to go a little more in depth and get even deeper with this and talk about how to remove notes and therefore insert space into your playing to create unique phrases and melodies in your Tom Grooves. And of course, we'll add in a backbeat to make it feel like a groove. And then lastly, I'll share with you a shortcut at the end of the lesson that will get you immediately playing cool Tom Grooves. So if you're a total beginner, you'll be able to kind of circumnavigate. You'll be able to jump straight over to a shortcut hack that's going to help you get there more quickly. But I definitely encourage you to stick with me through all these steps. This is very simple, broken down, and it's going to get you some results. This is going to be a lot of fun. But first, hey, if you're a beginner drummer, I have a special gift for you today. I want to help you quickly get going playing grooves and fills that you'll actually use in your favorite songs. So I want you to download my totally free PDF e-guide called 25 Practical Grooves and Fills for the Beginner Drummer. Now, these aren't just random grooves and fills. These 25 grooves and 25 fills are all real-world tested because I've used every one of them in hundreds of songs in my 13 plus years of gigging experience. I think you're gonna have a lot of fun with this. It's gonna get you up and running quickly so you can just get going, playing songs, doing what you wanna do on the drums. So grab this free e-guide. It's totally free. It is a total no-brainer. Go grab that. All right, on with today's lesson. I love lessons like this because of how simple they are. We're literally just building off of very simple building blocks, and very quickly this can get really interesting and potentially even complex. So if you're a total beginner, you can definitely get started with where we're going here in these first couple steps. If you're a more intermediate player, this is still going to challenge you, and we're going to get into some bonus things that are going to definitely make this challenging. But hey, before we get going, be sure to download the notation guide in the description. Totally free. Grab the PDF notation guide so that you can follow along. And most importantly, take this to your practice room. And even if you're not really reading notation yet and you want to learn, the best way to learn is to have that in front of you while I'm playing so you can see what I'm doing, hear what I'm doing, and then make sense of it visually. Because drum notation is not complicated. It's very simple. It's very logical, very mathematical, and it makes a lot of sense. And so definitely check it out. Even if you're not comfortable with it, you can definitely learn it. So step one, we want to put our kick drum on autopilot. We've got to have the kick drum on autopilot because basically throughout everything we're doing today, our kick drum is just going to play quarter notes. We're not doing anything crazy with the kick. That'd be a topic for another lesson. What we want to do is get to where we can play anything with our hands on top of a quarter note kick drum pattern, because when you can keep a quarter note going on the kick, suddenly it feels like you're maintaining a groove. You know, if we don't have the kick there and we're just playing stuff with our hands, it might not really feel so much like a groove. It might be more like a fill we might play. And that's why what we're doing today is going to help you with fills too, even though we're focusing on Tom Grooves and parts that maneuver around the kit and incorporate the full kit. But keeping that kick drum going is going to give it a foundation so that what you're playing has a momentum to it, it has a drive to it, it has a pulse. So we've got to make sure we get our kick drum on autopilot. So the first thing we want to do is get our quarter notes going at 60 beats a minute. Do this with your metronome. You can go a little faster if you want to. Somewhere between 60 and 70 is where I'd recommend you start. We're going to start at 60 and play 16ths on the snare. So just alternating 16ths, right hand lead, right, left, right, left, along with the kick drum quarter note. So that's going to sound like this. Notice the only thing there that had to lock with the kick was just the right hand on every beat. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4. So we're just locking right hand with right foot, which is a pretty straightforward, not complicated thing to do. And so at a core level, if you're having any trouble with that, if you're a total beginner and you're diving into this, that's totally cool. You can catch on to this, and maybe the first thing you've got to do is just make sure that right hand is syncing up with the kick. Just like that. And also, we're trying to stay pretty quiet here. We want to be pretty quiet with our snare playing right now, but keep the kick drum at like a medium to loud volume because of where we're going next. So step 2, so we've got our kick drum going. Hopefully it's feeling somewhat autopilot. It's okay if it's not totally autopilot yet. That's just our step 1 to doing that. And by the end of this, you'll have a much more autopilot right foot after you spend some time practicing this. But step 2, we want to get our hands playing independently of our right foot. So we're still going to play these same 16th singles, but we're going to start throwing in accents, because what we've got to be able to do is hear and play accents that are independent of what the kick is doing. And that's where the coordination, the true separation starts here. So starting out, we're just going to play accents on the beat, nice and easy, where we're just going just like that. But then it gets a little bit more complicated, because then what we want to do, while still keeping everything soft except for the accents, we want to then accent the E of the beat, which means 1 E and 2 E and right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. So we've got this accent that's happening independent of where the kick drum is playing. And that's where this can get weird. So the key is relaxing, keeping it nice and tight, practicing this slowly over and over again. Then once we do the E's, we want to accent the ands like this. Which, by the way, at its core, is basically the core of a train beat. If you can do that, if you can play alternating 16ths on the snare and accent the ands, 1 E and 2 E and, there you go. That's the fundamentals for a train beat, and that's going to help you with really getting that going and getting that feel going, because that can feel kind of weird. I remember the first time I had to play a song with a train beat, it felt so sloppy because I hadn't really practiced really doing that. So that's going to help you out a lot if you're into songs that have that kind of groove feel. And then once we do that, we want to accent the that last 16th subdivision of the beat. So now we're going 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4. And I think this actually feels kind of natural. Accenting the E's like we did a minute ago, 1 E and 2 E, feels kind of weird. That's the hard one. Ands feels like a train beat, so that's something we've heard a lot of. Accenting the is also something that we hear a lot in music, and so I think it's a little bit simpler, a little bit easier to do, but still requires that precision of making sure you're hitting it in time and you're keeping your alternating singles here locked in with the kick. So practice each of those accent subdivisions on their own. So like practice accenting the beat for a while till that's feeling good. Practice just accenting the E for a while until that's feeling good, and so on. But here I'll just demonstrate, here's what it sounds like if you cycle through all of those. So you do a measure of each. And hey, if you're having any trouble with that, and maybe if you are a total beginner coming into this and you're figuring out the coordination side of this, the first thing you might want to do before even attempting the accents is just practice a simple crescendo, so getting louder, decrescendo, getting softer with your singles, while keeping the same volume kick going. So it might be something like this. Something like that, just along with your metronome, making sure everything's staying in time. Keep the kick at as similar of a volume as you can without the kick getting louder and louder as your hands get louder. And just practice getting those dynamics independent, because doing different dynamics between limbs is actually a really great way to build independence that we don't talk about as much. I refer to this as dynamic independence, the ability to play louder with one hand than with the other. And so if you're having trouble with the accents, maybe first just practice getting louder, then getting softer with those quarter notes, keeping the kick the same. That can be really helpful. But now step 3, this is where it gets fun because this is where we add in the toms. We're literally going to repeat step 2, but instead of playing those accents on the different parts of the beat on the snare, we're going to play those on the toms. So if we're playing an accent that the right hand plays, we're just going to play that on the floor tom, and then any of those left hand accents, so the syncopated parts of the beat, the E's and the U's, we'll play that on the rack tom. So here's what it sounds like if we cycle through all 4 of those. So in the title, I told you 3 steps, and that was 3 steps. Now we're going deeper with this because we also have a 4th and a 5th step to go more in depth with this. But if you are a beginner and you're doing this for the first time, this is a great place to stop and really just work at what we've done so far in these first 3 steps, because you can actually do a lot with this 3rd step. I know there in the demonstration, you just saw me doing exactly the exercise, but you can get creative with this and start pushing towards the creative improvising kind of zone here, where you can think of different like tom rhythms, melodies, kind of like this. So if we just play the exercise, we might play. We end up with things like that where we're hitting on the ands or the beats down here, E's or U's up here. But what if we just start making things up? So 2 core things I hope you've noticed at this point that make any drum part, groove, fill interesting: accents and orchestration. So if you can switch up your accents, like throw accents into what you do, suddenly it makes it interesting. If you switch up your orchestration, so which drums you're hitting, suddenly that makes it interesting. And so you can literally create all sorts of interesting stuff and parts and fills just out of singles. I hope you understand that the secret to creating interesting drum parts, interesting fills, is not learning weird stickings. In my years of gigging experience, playing experience, when I'm creating fills, rarely am I doing like weird paradiddle type stickings. Maybe in like a jazz kind of setting, if I'm playing something lightly and I need like a little snare lick, maybe. But you're not going to be playing rudiments on the toms. That's just crazy. Sure, there are fusion drummers out there. There are those guys that are nuts, and they're playing crazy stuff like that. But that's not really that practical. We can play singles. We can say the singles are our primary rudiment, and we could even say that's all we're going to use when we're playing fills. And you can create endless amounts of fills because you can throw in accents. You can change your dynamics. You can change your orchestrations, and you can create so many different rhythms and melodies just out of that. So you can stop right here. You could stop watching the video right here, go download the guide and work through these first 3 steps and get to where you're creating really cool things just playing slow singles around the kit, and you're coordinating that with your kick drum quarter notes. And that is awesome. If you've been following along with me, you're sitting at your kit right now and you're doing this too, yes, that is awesome. I'm proud of you for doing this and for sticking with me and following along, because this is going to take you a long way. But hey, if you're ready to go a little deeper, let's dive into steps 4 and 5, where we're going to talk about really getting crazy with this, really getting creative, improvisatory, and building grooves and even fills out of these kinds of patterns. So step 4, this is where we want to remove notes, or you could think of this as inserting space. Remove notes or insert space to create phrases and melodies. So you saw there in step 3 how we can definitely create melodies and unique rhythms by hitting toms, by using accents and different orchestrations. And so those are the 2 fundamental ways to make your singles interesting around the kit. But we can also remove notes so that we literally just choose to not play certain notes. That way there's space. And that's really important because most drum fills you hear are not just 16ths for a measure. They might be, and you can definitely make 16ths for a measure musical by adding the accents and the interesting orchestrations. And sometimes you need a fill of just straight 16ths. Sometimes the song calls for that. But other times you want to make things interesting or even syncopated, and so you can strategically remove notes. Just decide to not play a certain note, and it's amazing how much different your 16ths might feel at that point. So we're gonna get a little bit more specific and practical with our step 5 where we're going in a minute, because I know step 4 here is kind of just, I'm throwing some information at you and saying, try this. What I want you to try is just playing 16ths on your snare and decide which notes you want to remove. So like beat 3, for instance. I'm gonna not play beat 3. That means it would sound like this. 1 E and a 2 E and a da, 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 da. When you take out a beat like that, suddenly it makes it feel syncopated because your brain kind of hears an accent there on that of 2. 1 E and a 2 E and E and a 4 E and a. And that makes for an interesting fill. Especially if you leave off that last 4 too. I think that's interesting too. If you play doom 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 doom. So we basically just have 2 strings of notes there, and that makes for kind of a cool fill. So what I want you to do is just think through, all right, what kind of, like, where can I just take out 2 or 3 notes from the 16th notes to create something interesting? In that case, I took out a good many notes, and I was thinking more in terms of what are like 3 little rhythms I can throw in there to create something interesting. Ga 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 ga, do do do, boom 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 boom. That makes it feel so interesting and so musical, and it makes a tom groove kind of interesting too when you could put in space like that. So that's all that step 4 is. It kind of sets the stage for where we're going in step 5. But I want you thinking about that. Where can you remove notes from your 16ths to make something interesting? Now, step 5. This is where we want to add a backbeat to make it feel more like a groove. So we're basically taking everything we worked on up to this point, and you could even take the exercises we did back there in steps 2 and 3, and then just add an accent that always happens on beat 4. And that kind of gets you most of the way there, because as soon as you have a backbeat, suddenly it feels like a groove. So we could have all these 16ths that are over our quarter note pulse on the kick drum, throw in a backbeat on beat 4, maybe also on beat 2, and suddenly it feels like a groove because we've got our pulse and our momentum, our foundation down here on the kick. We've got a backbeat, and then whatever else is going on the toms kind of just feels like icing on the cake at this point. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to play you an example of something you might come up with. So I'm going to play something where we've got a string of 16ths. We've inserted some space into them. We're just doing singles, right hand lead singles, but we've inserted space, so we're not constantly playing singles for whole measure, but then we've added in backbeats. I'm going to play an example and then break down for you exactly what it is and how you might land there at a similar scenario. Because really here in steps 4 and 5, we're getting more advanced, and I'm pushing you to be more creative. I'm not just spoon feeding you, hey, practice this and this and this and this. That's what we did in the first 3 steps. But now I want to push you towards creating your own things, because that's ultimately going to serve you well in the long term. So here's something you might come up with. I'll show you exactly how I came up with it and how we can really break it down and practice it in a more simple manner. We've got our kick drum quarter notes, our backbeat on 2 and 4, so it's kind of just a 4 on the floor groove, and then we have a tom rhythm thrown into that, which was doom 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 da doom 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 ba doom 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 ba doom 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 ba doom, with an extra note thrown in there on the second measure. So if we make this super simple and we just think in terms of rhythm, what would this be if we just played it on the snare? Now, one thing that's worth mentioning is I'm not explicitly playing everything right hand lead anymore, because it makes more sense most of the time to, if you're playing around the kit, if you're hitting a lot of toms, it makes more sense to play the snare, if you're playing a backbeat 2 and 4, with the left hand. So normally, hitting a beat on the snare, we would probably do that with the right hand if we wanted to keep this right hand lead. But unless we're doing something like this, like that, where we're going straight off a tom right into the snare like that, most of the time it just makes more sense to let our backbeats be the left hand, because that's what we're used to doing anyways when we're playing grooves, you know, with straight timekeeping on the ride or the hats. We're hitting the snare with our left hand. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we simplify the orchestration of what I just did and we say let's just play that on the snare, we end up with actually, I think I threw in that extra note both times. Either way, it doesn't matter. What I want you to do is think of a rhythm like that. Dun dun dun, ga da 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 da, dun 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 dun. Something like that, and just practice that on your snare on top of the kick drum quarter notes. Because remember, what this all comes down to at a core level is you're teaching your hands to play whatever you want them to play, independent of the kick, because the kick has to be on autopilot where it can just keep going. And actually, if you're a more advanced player digging into this, add in the left foot too. This also frees you up to do snare cadence kind of stuff. Lots of cool stuff you can do when your hands begin working independently of your feet, where your feet can just play the same thing over and over again, and hands can play anything. So come up with a rhythm there on your snare. Remember, it's stemming from sixteenths, stemming from alternating sixteenths, but insert some space. That way you can play the backbeats there with your left hand if you want to, and then just move that around the kit. Figure out what works, what sounds good, what makes sense. Because remember too, if you want to keep the toms going right into the snare without space before, you can hit the snare with your right hand. Kind of like that. So if the backbeat needs to be right hand, so be it, that's fine. Practice it that way. So that's where you start, just coming up with different rhythms, different melodies, as we can call them, on the snare, and figure out, all right, do I need to do these backbeats right hand, keep it right hand lead, or can I do left? Here are some other things you might come up with. And notice I still shifted some things around. I didn't play each of those accents on the snare. Sometimes I'd hit the tom instead. Point is, get creative. I think that deep down inside, this is what I believe about you, deep down inside, you are more creative and capable of coming up with these cool things than you think you are. You just need that foundation, that springboard to get you going. And that's what I really hope those first 3 steps did, so that then you're prepared to dive into steps 4 and 5 here and really start creating stuff. Because the truth is, there's no shortcut to creating and improvising on the drum set other than making yourself do it. You don't just naturally fall into, I'm just creating and improvising. It doesn't just suddenly happen. You got to practice things that help you get there, but then you have to actually decide, all right, I'm going to sit here and create. I'm going to, just for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to make up stuff. It's okay if it sounds bad. This is why we practice. The idea is that we ought to be sounding bad when we practice a lot of times. That means we're challenging ourselves, we're staying out of our comfort zone, we're working on something new. It's fine if you sound bad, don't worry about it. Have fun just creating stuff. The point is, make yourself create, make yourself improvise, and it's gonna get better and better. Practice the exercise there from the first 3 steps. So practice really nailing that in. Let that be your math practice, your technical practice, the thing that you get going with to make sure everything's locking together and feeling good. Then from there, so maybe you work on that for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, however much time you have. Then, so that's your first half. Then for your second half of practice, just practice experimenting. Keep the kick drum quarter notes going and figure out what rhythms can I play on my snare while adding in the backbeats. Then how can I move those around the toms? And that's how you have fun. That's where you realize, you know what, I can do this. It's where you start discovering, hey, I actually have the potential to create cool stuff and not just play simple, straight timekeeping grooves, because not every song needs simple, straight timekeeping. Sometimes you need something more interesting, and it's really fun and freeing to discover that you can do that. So hope you have a lot of fun with this. Now, I told you back at the beginning, there is a shortcut. So if you're a total beginner and you want to get into playing Tom Grooves, there's a shortcut, somewhat of a cheat, that gets you a similar sounding result very quickly. So if we want to play a Tom Groove where we're just hitting the snare on 2 and 4, we've got our backbeat going on, and it just has the feel of a typical rock tom groove. All you got to do is play the eighth notes you would normally play on the hats or the ride, play those on the floor tom, and then once you get that going, so it might sound like this starting off. Starting off, that's all it is. That's our number one. Basically, that's the money beat, or like a 4 on the floor money beat, where we've got the quarter notes on the kick, eighth note timekeeping with the right hand, snare on 2 and 4. Then what we want to do is just throw in a little bit of rack tom in between the floor tom notes, basically like this. We're just throwing it in on E's and U's. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4, like that. So literally don't overthink it. All that is alternating singles. All we're doing is right, left, right, both, right, left, right, both, right, left, right, both, right, left, right, both. Sometimes left hand's hitting the rack tom. We could also hit the floor tom. So taking that back to what we did a minute ago with just playing it on the snare, that would literally just bring us to where both hands are hitting at the same time on 2 and 4, but it's literally just boom, boom, got. So if you can play right hand singles, eighth note singles, left hand eighth note singles, both hand alternating 16th singles, that's it. That's why I say over and over again that playing cool stuff, playing neat parts that are unique and creative, it doesn't mean learning weird stickings. It doesn't mean practicing crazy stuff. It means nailing the basics. When you're super solid with your singles, you can do all of this stuff really well. And when you get your hands solid, feeling good with the kick drum, you can create whatever you want. This doesn't have to be complicated. This is very simple. So dive straight in and go and try that. If you're a total beginner, you can get a basic tom groove going just like that. You'd be amazed at how easy that is as soon as you got a little bit of that basic coordination between your hands and your right foot. All right, as we wrap up, I have a question for you. I'm really interested to know this. What song comes to mind when you think about tom grooves? So I've played in church for 13 years now. So I've been playing modern worship music for a long time. Some of you church drummers definitely know what I'm talking about, but so many modern worship songs involve a lot of tom stuff. There's just so much of the jungle drum thing. So I can think of so many worship songs where what we've worked on today so directly applies. But whichever kind of music you play a bunch, whether you're playing at your church, playing in a cover band, original band, whatever it is you do, playing your favorite songs in your basement, tell me what's the first song that comes to mind when we talk about tom grooves. In other words, what song are you going to finally be able to really nail and have a lot of fun with thanks to working on these steps that we've covered today? Leave a comment, let me know, let's get some discussion going. And before you go, be sure to grab those 2 PDF e-guide resources. One is the notation guide for this lesson, basically 5 steps to improvising tom grooves, your notation guide. Grab that, take it to your practice room. Also grab that 25 practical grooves and fills for beginner drummers if that's something that you think is going to help you out. If you're a beginner drummer, I think that's really going to help you tremendously and give you just a great springboard from which you can create fills and you can create grooves and be able to play your favorite songs. So I think you'll have a lot of fun with that. Be sure to grab those 2 resources in the description below. As always, thanks everyone so much for watching. Thanks for hanging out today. This has been a lot of fun. I hope this is a super valuable, helpful lesson for you. I hope this helps you become a better drummer, mastering this instrument and feeling great about your drumming, feeling free and musical and nailing songs. All right, have a great week. I will see you on the next lesson. Know that you can do this. Stay non-glamorous.